Thank you very much for your kind patience. I guess event management, event organization requires some crisis management from time to time. So thank you very much to all for your kind patience and flexibility. And thanks again to hosting MEPs Ms. Carvalho and Ms. Chabot, co-chairs of the European Parliament Intergroup. This event is kindly co-organized with OceanNet and CDR Mares. I would like to thank you once again very much for all steps of the event organization. Taking into consideration the fact that we're almost 20 minutes behind in the agenda, I'll just very quickly provide some housekeeping rules to the audience. So today's discussion will be moderated by Ms. Mina Epps, Director of the IUCN Ocean Team. I think the best suited person to drive us through today's discussion. Hello, Mina from Brussels, and thank you very much for tuning in. And then turning to our participants, for people in the room, of course, during the Q&A session, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll take as many questions as possible. And then for online participants, you can use the Q&A box that should appear at the right-hand side of your screen, so you can pose your questions there. Just in doing so, please make sure to choose the all panelists option so we can see all questions as they arrive. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. And no further ado, I'll just provide the floor to MEP Ms. Carvalho for setting the scene.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. And first, I would like to thank the intergroup and Elias Grampas that has prepared this for us together with CDR and OceanNet. A special word to my co-host and my colleague Catherine Chabot, and also to my colleague Barry Andrews that has honored us with his presence here. And we were discussing Ireland and Portugal and France, where Mrs. Chabot now is going to sail across the ocean. They are countries that very much looking at the ocean as an important priority. So I look forward to your presentations with a lot of interest. I'm myself an engineer and professor in mechanical engineer on energy. I have not talked exactly on the ocean technologies, but some of my colleagues of the group are very much pioneer and at the forefront of ocean, wave energy, tidal energy. So in the University of Lisbon, Institute Superior Technical, probably some of you know them. So I'm very keen of listen also from my professional background as an engineer and a professor, very interested in looking for your ideas and your projects. So the subject of today, it's a very important one, as we will not be able to be climate neutral without extra technologies, without negative emissions technologies. So there are sectors that are very difficult to abate, and without extra effort, that will not be possible. And we still do not have these technologies completely available in terms of being ready to use. So a lot of research and innovation, pilot scale, demonstration scale, depending on the technologies, are still required. And for that, we have fortunately funding both in our Horizon Europe and in other programs based on the European budget, but not only. So European budget, you should look also to the regional funds and to the other possibilities that the European budget offers. Sometimes bigger funds than the Horizon Europe to do some synergies to help to fund your ideas. As I usually say to my students, we should look at carbon as a cycle carbon. So, and the question is not to make the carbon an evil, but it's us that we should know how to deal with the carbon and in certain way the proper way should be to have a cycle approach to carbon. And some of these technologies, exactly what they do, they capture the carbon and use the carbon, and that can be released again and captured again. And that is one of the points that I would like to stress in the beginning, the importance of to having a strategy. We have a balance in the carbon loop. And some of these technologies are land-based, but as we have restrictions on the land use, and we have a big capacity on the oceans, we should look at the technology and the offers that the ocean give to us, and of keeping this carbon balance. And fortunately, ocean absorbs part of the CO2, and we have several ecosystems and coastal ecosystems that have a very important role in absorbing the CO2 when they are preserved and restored. But on the contrary, if they are destroyed, they release CO2 that they have been accumulated for years or for centuries, and to the atmosphere. So is one, even another extra motivation for us to have a special attention to the environment and the sustainability of our waters and rivers and oceans, because they are very important for the balance that we need on the CO2. Our atmosphere is a very fragile, so we should not disturb the equilibrium that allow us life on the planet, because otherwise is a question of even destroying life as we know it, if we are not careful with the equilibrium of the carbon in the atmosphere. So so the role of the blue carbon, and by blue carbon we define the carbon sequestration activities done by oceanic and coastal ecosystems. It's really important, and we are going to listen today of several research activities sponsored by, I think that they are sponsored by Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe, and that is important that we advance scientific and technical, that at the same time we should go further in the legislation and the political side of it, and also we need to better knowledge what are the possibilities, better data, so that we can also create a framework in order to promote these technologies. But it's also important for us not only the political framework, but also the conscience of everyone of the importance of these water systems in the CO2 balance. So also the communication to the public is very important through the politicians, directly to the public in general. It's a very important topic. So we need science to support our policy work. We need science also that in our communication, and we are also pushing more more opportunities in the funding for this kind of systems. And because of that, when I was recently one of the rapporteurs of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, that is part of the framework program of Horizon Europe, that is organized in KICs, Knowledge Innovation Communities. I have proposed a new KIC exactly on water and oceans. The Commission has not yet opened the call for this KIC. We are pushing, because the Commission, when it doesn't was the idea doesn't come from them. It came from the Parliament. Was an amendment from the two rapporteurs that were two Portuguese rapporteurs, but we managed to push it through the Council. And we have to make sure that the Commission, without delay, opens the call for this kick on water and oceans. That is so important. And you have another opportunity to develop your projects and to add also the higher education, because the EIT has science, innovation, and higher education. So that's what I want to tell you. I would like to thank, and I look forward to your presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MEP Ms. Carvalho, for setting the scene and highlighting the key importance and momentum of today's discussion. Ms. Carvalho referred to science and the need for more funding for such key opportunities. On this note, I would like to take a moment to thank my colleague Regine and colleagues from the European Parliament as well for helping us navigate through these early challenges in today's event. So thanks for this. I hope all goes smooth here onwards. So just on this note, I'll be providing the floor to Ms. Minipes, moderator of today's discussion, to follow for advancing the discussion forward.
Thank you very much, Elias. And once again, a very, very warm welcome to this very, very timely meeting today and achieving climate neutrality and the goals of the Paris Agreement and looking at opportunities and challenges for ocean-based methodologies of carbon dioxide removal. So it is my pleasure. So thank you very much for the invitation to moderate this event. I also like to thank MEP Maria Carvalho and MEP Catherine Chabot, not only for co-hosting this event today, but also for your leadership as co-chairs of the Ocean Governance Working Group on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development. And thank you also all participants joining us here today. So thanks, a warm thank you to all. As highlighted, we are talking today about carbon sinks, and we know we have a climate crisis. And as more and more, including the high-level panel on sustainable ocean economy, often looked at the ocean as the climate solution to climate change or tackling climate change. So we are talking both about natural and engineered solutions. So, what are there? So here today, we are talking about the role in the ocean in terms of removing and storing CO2. Also the governance and the governance challenges that come with it, monitoring, attributing, but also accounting for CO2 removal. And we heard earlier today as well about the excellent introductory remarks from MEP Carvalho, who talked about the fragility and really that we shouldn't disturb this equilibrium. So the ocean has been absorbing a lot of the CO2, which has made it more acidic. And acidification has increased by 30%, which is actually having huge implications on economies, ecosystem, and their productivity together. So, but without further ado, because I know we are running a little bit behind schedule, and we have a lot of things to go through, including some really exciting panelists here today. But before we kind of kick off and have this discussion, I would like to invite Professor David Keller, who is from Ocean Nets and CDR, Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany. He will basically start by looking at painting the big picture. So what is behind ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and the negative emission technologies at hand. So with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Professor Keller. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here. So yeah, as has been said, I'm going to give an overview of ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, or CDR technologies, and these are also sometimes called negative emission technologies, or NETs. If you could go to the next slide. So why are we here? I think it's already been said today. We know to meet the Paris Agreement, have to reduce emissions. That has to be the primary thing we do. But it looks like this isn't going to be enough. So if you could put the next point up. Already in 2017, The UNEP report highlighted this, that we really need carbon dioxide removal as likely a necessary step to achieve our climate goals and limit warming. And then this was reinforced in the recent IPCC report. So if you could put up the next points. I just highlighted some quotes from the special 1.5 degree report, as well as the recent AR6 Working Group 3 report, saying that CDR is a necessary element of mitigation portfolios to achieve even net zero CO2 emissions, or in the case of overshoot, to try and remove excess CO2. So that's why we're here, because we know that we need carbon dioxide removal. Next slide, please. So far, mainly land-based approaches for CO2 removal have been discussed and developed. BECS, which is the graphic I have up here, is one of the favored ones that's been highlighted a lot, but there's many others. This is where a lot of the research funding has gone so far. Next point. But it raises the question, can land-based approaches achieve the amount of CDR that is likely needed? Next point, please. And there's some questions about this, and there may be limitations on land-based CDR. Are all regions suitable to do land-based carbon dioxide removal? Are the resources in place? Next point. One of the big things that comes up is the availability of land. Do you want to use land for food or for CO2 removal? That's a potential conflict. Next. Maybe island states or coastal countries, it's more favorable to do something in the ocean rather than on limited land areas. So that's another potential limitation. Next. And then there's a number of other issues: water availability. Do you have the carbon storage capacity? Other resources that raise the question of, really, can we do enough carbon dioxide removal on land to meet the amount that we think we need to achieve our climate goals? And that's why we're looking at the ocean. Two good reasons to consider ocean-based CO2 removal. So the first, if you remember from your high school classes or before, the ocean covers most of the Earth's surface. This means there's plenty of area to do this, and there's probably less competition for space when compared to land. Now, of course, right near coast, there could be some conflicts for space, but I think in general, there's a lot more ocean area than land area. Another good reason is, if you look at where all the carbon is in the carbon cycle, most of it is in the ocean. This donut diagram here roughly shows the distribution of carbon in different reservoirs. The blue area is the ocean, where you can see the vast majority of carbon is. There's a little bit of carbon stored in vegetation and soils, which is this orange area here. And then the atmosphere is this very narrow sliver, which is where there's carbon in the atmosphere, and it's causing us a problem as a greenhouse gas. So the question is, can we move some of this CO2 from the atmosphere and put it in the ocean? We know the ocean has the capacity to store all of this carbon, and this is ultimately where anthropogenic carbon will end up. So you could think of doing ocean CDRs perhaps accelerating what might happen anyway if we don't do anything. Next. So what are these ocean-based CDR approaches that have been discussed? There's a number of them that are out there. I'll start in the top left-hand corner. There's the idea of ocean alkalinity enhancement, or alkalization. There's a number of ways that one could potentially do this, but the general idea is that if you increase the alkalinity of the surface ocean, you can get the ocean to chemically take up more CO2 and essentially store it permanently. The next idea that's been proposed is ocean fertilization. You may have heard of iron fertilization, but this could also be done with nitrogen or phosphorus. The idea here is that you would get the small plants or phytoplankton in the surface ocean to grow and take up carbon through photosynthesis. And when they sink, hopefully they'll take some of that carbon into the deep ocean, where it'll be stored for a long period of time, or potentially permanently buried in the sediments. Actually, could you go back to that last slide? Yeah, I'm going to talk through this one for a while, so don't change it yet. Another idea that's out there is blue carbon sink enhancement. So blue carbon is talking about mangroves, seagrasses, salt marshes, or even macroalgae. So ideas here is, first, of course, you'd have to stop destroying these habitats, then restore them. And then what you would have to do if you wanted to do large-scale carbon dioxide removal is actually engineer things like large artificial salt marshes or something to try and store a lot of carbon. Related to this is ideas to grow marine biomass. So you could think of large offshore kelp farms. And what you could do with that kelp once you've grown it and it's taken up carbon is there's ideas that you could turn it into biochar and bury that carbon on land. Maybe you could turn that kelp into bioenergy. And when you combust that, capture the carbon from that, sort of a form of marine BECS. There's also ideas just to grow this kelp and sink it into the deep ocean and hope that the carbon in that biomass is stored in the deep ocean. There's other ideas for directly removing CO2 from seawater. This has been shown that it can be done in the laboratory. So this is like there's the idea for capturing CO2 from the atmosphere. Well, you can do the same thing from seawater. And once you've captured that CO2, then you, of course, have to store it potentially in a geological reservoir. Other ideas out there are on artificial upwelling or downwelling. The idea behind artificial upwelling is similar to ocean fertilization because the surface ocean tends to be depleted in nutrients. Well, there's more nutrients deep in the ocean. So if you could pump up some of these nutrients, you could have a fertilizing effect. The idea behind artificial downwelling is maybe you could get carbon to be taken up in the surface ocean, basically pump that carbon into the deep ocean. And then there's other ideas just to dump biomass in the deep ocean. It's been proposed to take crop residues and dump them into the deep ocean, or even the marine biomass that you've grown. Next slide, please. So a lot of the early work on these ideas was very theoretical and focused on just, is it a sound scientific idea? What are the side effects? What's the techno-economic feasibility? And this was done a lot with a lot of modeling, some desk-based studies, and a very few laboratory studies. I think all this work has been summarized nicely in the USA National Academy of Sciences report on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal that I'd recommend you reading if you're interested in what was going on before. Next point. Currently, where the science is at and what's ongoing is the research has started to take the next steps, and we've done this in Ocean Nets and CDR MERA, where we're doing new experiments, more realistic modeling simulations, and better techno-economic analyses like life cycle assessments for some ideas. Next step, or next point. Both of these projects also involve a lot of social science research that was missing from the earlier work to determine not only what's technically feasible, but also what might be desirable. And there's a lot of stakeholder work going on within this context as well. Here I show some pictures from some of the ongoing work, a mesocosm study, as well as a science policy breakfast that was recently held in Berlin. Next point, please. Now that's the science. It's also that there's a lot of companies working on ocean-based CDR. I know it may be kind of hard to see. There's 58 companies that have a business plan to do ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, and this is excluding those companies working on blue carbon because it's difficult to tell who's doing restoration and who's actually trying to do large-scale carbon dioxide removal. But companies are out there. Next point, please. And they're actually doing things. So these companies are doing field experiments and pilot studies are being conducted by some of these. For example, Project Vesta just dumped 650 tons of olivine to do ocean alkalinity enhancement on a beach in Long Island this summer. So they're actually doing some real world things. Next slide, please. So I guess this brings me to my last point. Can ocean-based CO2 removal contribute to realistic and effective pathways to achieve the Paris Agreement goals? Next point. I think so far we're starting to get there in terms of the science, in terms of what's feasible. I mean, could you technically do something and it would remove CO2? In terms of what's desirable, that's still an open question. We don't know if the costs and side effects might be worth it or if it's socially desirable. And that's sort of where the state of the science is at the moment. I think now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alexander.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Keller, and for rushing us through that. Quite a lot to unpack there, but it's great. And you also we often refer to the ocean as basically taking up much of the planet's surface, more than 70%. And we should not forget the three-dimensional space of the ocean, which actually brings it in volume up to more than 90%. Thank you very much. Once again, that was very comprehensive and again, a lot of information. So we're grateful for that overview. Now we hand over to Professor Dr. Alexander Pols, and he will be also looking at some of the opportunities, but also challenges in governance, policy, and the international legal dimension of ocean-based and nets. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for the kind introduction. A pleasure to be here, members of Parliament, dear colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. A few words, and I'm trying to be super brief in light of time, on law and governance. Next slide, please. Thank you. What we need to keep in mind when talking and thinking about ocean nets or ocean-based carbon dioxide removal technologies is that these activities are conducted within the marine environment. And that has a specific legal consequence, namely that the limitations and the considerations of the international law of the sea need to be observed. That's a fundamental difference to technologies that take place on land, also in light of the potential transboundary effects that at least some of the activities may ultimately show. Now, when talking about international law, it should be taken into account in particular the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, an international treaty which is often referred to as the Constitution for the Oceans, which governs and sets limits to certain activities conducted by states on the oceans. This treaty is a framework treaty, which means that it needs to be specified in light of specific activities, and when it comes to activities that are associated with the introduction of substances into the marine environment, and that has, as David Keller has demonstrated, is the case with many of the ocean-based CDR approaches, then we need to observe the regime for dumping. And indeed, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea has been substantiated by two other treaties, which are often called the London Convention and the London Protocol, administered by the International Maritime Organization. I'm going to have a few more words on those two treaties. Next slide, please. Why that? Importantly, the London Protocol has been amended quite recently in 2013 with specific regard to the regulation of what is called in that treaty marine geoengineering. Now, this term is maybe not identical, but in a way synonymous to the activities that we are talking about here. And indeed, this 2013 amendment is the first, at least potentially, binding international regulation that explicitly applies to ocean-based CDR. Now, having said that, this amendment has not yet entered into force. Only 6 states have ratified the amendment, and the number that is needed is beyond 30. So there is still a long way to go. Notwithstanding this, it is interesting to regard this regime in terms of a potential model also for other international legal regimes concerning activities that are conducted in combination with carbon dioxide removal. Now, the 2013 amendment has a list of activities. So far, only one ocean-based CDR approach is mentioned on that list, and that is ocean iron fertilization, which means that all other activities cannot be researched so far. And it's also important to highlight that this amendment refers to what has been called legitimate scientific research. It is not applicable to commercial activities, which gives rise to the question, how are we going to deal with commercial activities in the future? So the clear focus of this amendment is on research. And indeed, it contains a framework for assessing whether research projects on ocean-based CDR approaches can be conducted. It provides for environmental impact assessment procedures, is heavily based on the precautionary approach, all that also taking into account the need to protect the marine environment, taking into account that some of the activities concerned are indeed associated with certain risks that may ultimately affect the marine environment. Now, why am I highlighting this amendment even though it has not yet entered into force? Because it could be considered as a tool to provide for responsible scientific research on ocean-based CDR. Next slide, please. And this is going to be my final slide. When not only focusing on law sensu stricto, but also thinking of how ocean-based CDR approaches should be governed, then a couple of considerations and challenges arise. And those challenges are connected to the transsectoral nature of the relevant regimes. As we have seen, I've highlighted the London Convention and Protocol approach, but also other international fora have commented upon ocean-based CDR, and that, for example, includes the COB of the Convention on Biological Diversities, as well as many other actors, including states. Now, which fora should then be the competent one to take decisions on scientific projects concerning ocean-based CDR or even in future commercial activities? How to avoid collisions between different regimes? Now, in 2008, when the entire debate on what used to be called marine geoengineering started, the CBD took a completely different approach than the parties to the London Convention. example. Now, how are we going to deal with such situations? This obviously needs to be streamlined in order to support co-benefits. And perhaps most importantly, what kind of processes need to be applied, how to provide for the necessary legitimacy for participation of what stakeholders in decision-making processes on ocean-based CDR deployment. What about the issue of transparency and how to include the nature of future generations and where that is applicable of local and indigenous communities? All this need to be taken into account in future decision-making. To sum this up, this is a super complex issue also from the perspective of law and governance. Thank you very much.
That's, again, another very insightful and informative presentation that you gave, and giving us the big picture as well on the framework. And I was also very pleased to hear about the parties of the London Convention and Protocol, their plans and kind of further study new types of ocean CDR for its possible regulation under London Protocol, the Annex 4 on marine geoengineering. So thank you a lot for trying to kind of debunk these very complex topics and all the considerations that needs to be taken into account. We do have a request from MEP Carvalho to briefly having a question that she would like to ask you. So Ms. Carvalho, if you could ask the question, and if Professor Pols can be brief as well in his answer, and then we'll move on to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's just a question because unfortunately I cannot stay during the whole panel. It's a question to Dr. David Keller, a very interesting description of the technologies. And I wonder, because in my view, several of them or most of them has a lot of side effects, and it must be one of the most complex issues that you have in your research is the environmental impact of this. I was listening to the blue carbon sink enhancement or the ocean fertilization or the artificial upwelling or downwelling, and looking at all the problems that can bring side effects and how you deal with that. What is how do you see the research going on these issues? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that comment. I should say, I actually started research on this topic because I saw these side effects and I wanted to show why you shouldn't do some of these. I've come around to realize that we probably need some CO2 removal, but these side effects were my primary concern and why I actually got into the CDR research business in the first place. So within all the projects that I work at, trying to identify what these side effects are, and then sort of make them available so that others can decide if these side effects would be worth the trade-off of removing, achieving CO2 removal. And I think personally, for me, some of these approaches, the side effects probably outweigh any of the benefits, but other ones it's difficult to tell. All approaches have side effects. Some of these are co-benefits, but some are also clearly detrimental side effects. And I think this information needs to be made available, and then society needs to decide as a whole, are these side effects worth it to remove some CO2? I think that's for all CDR, whether it's land-based or ocean-based, these are decisions that have to be made, and it is a primary concern of mine, and my research often focuses on trying to identify these so that we can understand whether or not it's worth it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for answering that question and for actually looking at these potential risks. And I think all these kind of new areas really need to be progressed with caution and carefully analyzing and potential risks. So this actually brings us to the point of the agenda when we have a lineup of experts that would like to also kind of share their views. So I will ask each of the panelists to start off by looking at achieving the importance of achieving the Paris Agreement and how their respective organization or institution are working towards this goal. And again, in due interest of time, because we also have MEP Catherine Chabot online and also has to leave promptly. So please, if you could be brief on this first initial question, and do that. I will start. Yes, so all panelists, please, the ones who are online, please switch on your camera. Excellent. I would actually like to start with you, Rodrigo Ated, who you are a policy officer at the Maritime Innovation, Marine Knowledge and Investment at DG Mare, working for the European Commission. Please, could you please share with us the overview of your importance and how DG Mare is working towards this goal? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, the focus on the whys it's important achieving the Paris Agreement goals is, well, first you look at the citizens, EU citizens. They believe that climate change to be the single most serious problem facing the world. You look at the results of Eurobarometer, more recent results, we have 80% of citizens supporting, so saying that this is the most serious problem we are facing. Then it's important because reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a priority for organized human life on Earth, with the EU a leading player in worldwide efforts to tackle this 21st century challenge to humanity. As of 2021, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels have reached historically unprecedented levels, higher than at any time in the past 800,000 years. So additional warming above the 1.5% will threaten accelerating and the melting of permafrost and melting of ice caps on the poles, among others, and leading to non-linear and irreversible processes. So global warming worst case projections look increasingly likely, but there is still a window of opportunity to avoid these outcomes. So this has informed our priority to put climate targets at the center of the Green Deal, which aims at tackling in a systemic and coherent manner the environmental crisis, so climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, all driven by resources depletion. So our targets are net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, and reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. So clearly the EU does not act alone, it's a global challenge, and we actively engage and support our international partners on climate action, in particular through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement. In parallel to mitigation actions, also taking action on climate adaptation to face the unavoidable impacts of climate change. So as already presented here today, according to the IPCC Assessment Report 6, Working Group 3, CO2 removals is necessary to counterbalance hard to abate residual emissions if net zero CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions are to be achieved. And the ocean, as an inherent part of the global carbon cycle, may offer opportunities for increased CO2 removal, and indeed techniques are being researched to enhance carbon uptake and storage by the ocean. So covering 70% of the Earth's surface, our ocean contains the greatest quantity of carbon of all such reservoirs. A part of it is bound in biological matter, but most of it is chemically dissolved in water or deposited in sediments. So whilst the ocean has the potential for higher, and meaning by higher we mean potential for meaningful and safe CO2 removal, its use depends on developing responses to address questions related to the feasibility and sustainability, especially at large scales. And both for the EU and globally, this means keeping to the precautionary principle in the Treaty on the Function of the European Union, Article 191, and the do no harm principle or approach with a preference for nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I might actually take the opportunity to ask you a follow-up question so we can deal with that straight away. I'm thinking from your point of view or from the European Commission, what do you think is needed? I mean, you've listened to Professor Prell's presentation, but what do you think is needed in terms of governance processes behind ocean-based CDR to remove carbon dioxide or to move it along, so to say?
Yeah, well, in terms of governance process, we have already some regulation in place or in progress, not yet ratified, as already mentioned by all, and we need to proceed with implementation. So for further development, first and foremost, we need a better understanding of risks, benefits, and feasibility of potential technologies for carbon dioxide methods, but strong precautionary is necessary. So we have nature-based solutions, also belonging to the group of CDR methods, such as coastal blue carbon enhancement, which has the potential to bring multiple benefits by boosting biodiversity and local coastal economy, along with enhancing carbon sequestration. However, for coastal blue carbon, we need shared standards, monitoring, verification, and accounting methods, as well as guidelines for these. The updated EU International Ocean Governance Agenda from June 2022 acknowledges that there is an increasing interest in ocean-based carbon dioxide removal activities. The agenda promotes research on ocean carbon, and the EU is committed to improving the quantification of carbon storage and fluxes within marine ecosystems. The regulatory landscape is not empty. At the global level, the Convention on Biological Diversity, through its decision on geoengineering, sets preconditions on technological carbon dioxide removals, and the London Convention protocol allows and regulates carbon capture and sequestration in subsea geological formations, and on the other hand, it prohibits ocean fertilization except for research under certain conditions. So the EU International Ocean Governance Agenda promotes the ratification and effective implementation of the CBD decision and of the London Convention protocol. So there is also an interest from the G7 science ministers, which in June 2022 declared that while reducing greenhouse gas emissions remain the first priority, there is the need to assess the environmental, technical, economic, social feasibility and side effects of CO2 removals. And furthermore, they agreed to promote an exchange on research needs on monitoring, reporting, verifying, and the feasibility and effectiveness of CO2 removal approaches. So we have to distinguish these practices with clear co-benefits, notably on biodiversity, from geoengineering techniques like ocean fertilization, which has unknown effectiveness and impacts. So the IPCC already points out to the risks and uncertainties associated with such techniques, and the Convention for Biodiversity has established what we can consider a de facto moratorium on geoengineering, like fertilization. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, and also for sharing the EU's perspective and also the kind of support and promoting both ratification and implementation of various agreements. And I also like the point that you highlighted the need for international standards and guidelines. When it comes to the nature-based solutions, for example, IUCN, the International Union for Conservation, has a global standard for nature-based solutions, which is a holistic, comprehensive view, different criteria, which include, biodiversity, climate change. So it's a really comprehensive and looking at all those criteria. So perhaps there is also a further need for the space to look at the same thing, but from the geoengineering side. Thank you once again. I'd now like to actually turn over to it's Alexa Meyers-Boss, who's Head of Business Development and Origination, Agro and Weather Risk from Munich RE, sorry. And I would like you to kind of, in the kind of same manner, just really, really briefly, 1 or 2, maximum 2 minutes, to just kind of highlight the importance and your company's contribution to achieving the Paris goal and your views on that. So just if you could elaborate on that very briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mina. Thank you for introducing me. Maybe shortly on Munich Re, which is a financial player worldwide in the market. We are a reinsurer, so we are insuring, reinsuring, but on the other hand side, play a large role also on the investment side as a nature of the insurance business as such. That said, I mean, we are very long time already in the climate science, and as you might know, we are one of the first financial institutions taking that up. It was already in the 1970s where we had an entire department understanding the risks behind that climate change. And that said, of course, we also respond in our climate policy to the Paris Agreement, which we support in full-heartedly. The Paris Agreement, we as Munich Re Group, we bring all our strengths to support that transition to a low carbon economy in line exactly with that goal. And as said, our strength in detail is with risk transfer solutions, with climate risk expertise, and with our own investments. So, and in short, what is our conviction? And we said that it is 10 convictions on our climate policy, but I want to highlight the one which is about the climate agreement. And this is that this climate agreement, which has to limit to a warming well below 2 degrees, must and can be reached. And all the efforts which can be undertaken should be done to do that, to even have the warming below that 1 point, very well below these 2 degrees, and should be all efforts should be taken to have it towards a warming of 1.5 degrees. So that said, we are very much engaged in that, and yeah, to make it short, also in order to time, I leave it like that. So we are on the same page, and we support what we can do.
Yes, thank you very much, as well as also explaining a little bit what Munich Re does, and for those who are not familiar with that. I think it's a really interesting perspective, but you also sound quite optimistic in terms of actually looking at, yes, we need to get to net zero, but if we're really serious about saving this climate, we need to talk about the drawdown. And I'd like to hear from you as well. So what do you think is actually needed to kind of identify the marketable CDR solutions, or whether they're projects? What is needed exactly? Could you share some light on that from your expertise, what you think would be needed? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we are a fully owned private entity. I mean, we are a shareholder, though we are in the framework of all the regulations and laws. And of course, we are very much at the forefront on these ESG topics as well. So that is something which we have to digest for our own business. So we do all these accounting, the current accounting, and came up with also climate emission targets ourselves. So that said, this is something where we are active on the market. On the other hand side, let me share some thoughts on what is a marketable solution, right? I mean, what is the market which we look into? And I compare that with the land-based, nature-based solution, which were mentioned already earlier, and also the value-creating stakeholders, which are already on the market there. And it is on the financial side as well as on the carbon market side, a very large momentums. And with the EU Commission, I mean, we know this ETS, the European Carbon Trading System, but there's also voluntary carbon markets out there, and this is where we are active on, both on the investment side as well as on the risk side. And if I can shed some light in here, what is needed? I mean, first and foremost, it is and this is happening on the nature-based solution side. it is to find an investor, as simple as that, right? So an investor can be someone who is trying to put himself net zero based on the ESG targets, but also it can be just out of an investment case, someone who is interested in the climate investment and the sustainable investment topics. That said, if you build an investment case, want to build an investment case, you have to see what is the revenue stream out of that investment case, right? Because that is the simple math. And I'm not saying that the financial institutions are not willing to also put efforts to learn about that investment case, which might sunk costs in a way. But there is a revenue stream, which is the return of that investment. And if I look into that nature-based carbon markets, it's definitely these carbon certificates based on a CO2 ton sequestered or removed, which are the essence of that revenue stream, right? And because then you can monetize your investment. And that said, I mean, if I can go briefly into what is unlocking on the nature-based solution side, the carbon crediting, and I'm looking here into the voluntary carbon market, because on the compliance carbon market, I mean, there is all this regulation already set. And there is technology to be assessed by third parties, and they will come up with a certificate evaluating what that specific project can do, how much carbon they sequester, and what is the monitoring and evaluation at the end to really guarantee or in a way produce that carbon sink, right, on a ton basis. And just to give you some flavor on that, they are NGOs, not-for-profit certifiers, if you might know some of them, who are driving these certifications. And I think they are currently pulling together all the different strings of the investors, of the buyers of carbons, also on the producers of carbon credits, to make it a market. And that would be my input here in short. I mean, we know that is a huge topic, but that would be something maybe for food for thought. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Again, there's so many different topics surrounding the issue of using the ocean as a carbon sink. And I think we also need to be mindful of what we're actually calling a nature-based solutions, because there are nature-based solutions and there are also the kind of the engineered solution and such. But really, I really take your point that there is a strong momentum, there's trading system in place, and really looking into voluntary markets, but also the investment and risk, and that's really also where you come in. And really the take-home message from what I take from you were saying is really to finding that revenue stream and monitoring those investments and looking at certification, certification and ultimately, obviously, verification as well.
Yeah. And maybe to add on that, sorry, shortly, it's not about that we are not committing to something less of a financial return. I mean, we are not maximizing that profit as such. I don't want to have the audience having, these greedy investors here, because we have I would say, inherent interest to work and support climate action, because at the back end, we are taking the risks on our balance sheet, paying losses with large hurricanes and large natural catastrophes, which are accelerated by climate change. Yes. So it is a real benefit, which we also like to support here with our tools, which we have on shelf. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's certainly the case, especially for the reinsurers as well, that you mentioned. So again, I'm very mindful of time and also want to kind of be fair and give equal space to all the panelists. The next speaker I would like to invite is Dr. Antonia Leroy, who's the head of ocean policy at WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, at the European Policy Office based in Brussels. I see that you have a presentation, so I'd like you to really kind of, as you talk us through this briefly, being mindful of time, I'd just also like you to really emphasize the point in terms of, you know, the importance of reaching, not just the importance of reaching our climate targets with the help of ocean-based CDR, but also simultaneously reach our biodiversity goals, because we are very focused on climate, but there is that climate change and biodiversity nexus. So really looking forward to hearing from WWF. Thank you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina, and thank you for the organizer to invite me today. I'm really pleased to be here. My presentation will be really short, it's only photos. But first, just to say that for us, the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis are intertwined and need to be dealt together to not make the mistake from the past. So next slide, please. So we also have nature-based solution, let's say, to store carbon, to remove carbon, and this called restoration or, you know, habitat and species, kind of blue carbon or blue carbon habitats. So I might not go into detail of the image, but it's a WWF fact sheet that has been produced that show, you know, that there is a lot of benefit to restore our ecosystem in terms of carbon, but also socially, for insurance, for instance, also financially. There was a study around our network showing that if we restore degraded habitat, it could sequester up to 84 million tons of carbon, and more studies are raising this point. So next slide, please. Yeah, so it's the same. But also the species that are really key in this kind of blue carbon ecosystem. So just here, I would like to say that I think it's great to look at technologies and everything, and while it's developing and maybe mitigating side effects, or we really need to look at our nature-based solutions, so habitats and species, who are pretty much in bad shape in the EU. The Maritime Strategy Framework Directive is not implemented. We don't reach the good environmental status. We have currently a nature restoration law being discussed, which we a bit fear how the outcome will be, to be honest. And the marine habitat and species have been left a bit from the green regulation, I will say, maybe because we're more down to earth, I will say. So it's a bit far from us. So it's really key to take into account that, especially because the EU has the largest maritime territories, and that we could have a great impact worldwide, at least by example. So next slide, please. So yeah, the transition is needed. So I just discussed that a bit. Yeah, because the idea is also to decommission harmful activities, which also emit a lot of carbon to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So next slide, please. So the question now, because, you know, it's a great idea, but how we do that? Actually, in the EU, we have a practical tool called the Maritime Spatial Planning. It's coming from the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive. Member states have to release the MSP plan. It was by March 2020. Some are delayed, some have not done it. Some maritime spatial plans are really weak. Nature is not taking into account. There is no connectivity in the ecosystem. Stakeholder consultation have been taking place, but the outcome have not been really taken seriously into the plan. They really construction of scenarios. Sometime, you know, in our where we see a future, like climate change imply like species are moving around, the temperature or the current might change a bit. So how you make the scenario to really take into account all these components, and where your activity can take place, like maybe cumulative impact of activities. And I think this is really interesting for the technology that was described a bit before, because from my perspective, I think this should be included in the stakeholder consultation. I think it was also discussed, but so where we put it. So when we have a maritime spatial plan with all the human activities already existing, some must be removed first, I will say. Some new are coming, like offshore renewables, that's also needed to reach the Paris Agreement targets. And so where this technology could take place, maybe as pilot project, or what will be the best place in terms of ecosystem and habitat to maybe test such kind of technology. So I will stop there because this was how we do it, like the process. And just to mention that really, and I think what has been a challenge as well for us is like we have different background and expertise. Some are coming from a climate background, other biodiversity background, but there is knowledge gap to bridge here. We have done that internally and it was a great success. And I think both climate and biodiversity crisis can be tackled together and should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and excellent visuals there that you presented, as well as really highlighting how this relates also to marine spatial planning, but also things that are included like offshore renewables. And I think it's interesting that, offshore renewables and their interventions also businesses are looking to kind of mitigate impact. But I think, we are going beyond that. Just as we're going with climate and going beyond net zero, we need to look at nature positive economies and society, but also from a biodiversity perspective. So just a very brief, could almost be a yes or no in terms of WWF position in terms of, can we reach both the climate goal and the biodiversity goal, and can they go hand in hand? From your perspective, to take home.
Yes.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
I have hope, and we work together, and I think there is solution where we really bridge knowledge gap and we raise awareness on that. So yes, my answer is yes for now.
Yeah, thank you very much. We all need a bit of ocean optimism there. So thank you very much. So we are now moving on swiftly to Dr. Samantha Eleanor Tanza, working on CDR research and technology. She's the manager also at Bologna. And I would like you to kind of take the floor and also from your perspective, talk about a little bit, the importance of the cooperation between both industries and startups and the scientific community, because we heard many times, including from Rodrigo, from the EU perspective, that, we need to promote and we need to have, rigorous science undertaken for these new areas. Yes. I give you the floor, Samantha. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Mina. Happy to be here. I think this is a very good question because we're at a point where we have to move very, very quickly on climate change mitigation, including sort of all hands on deck. Well, obviously, reduction of emissions is going to be the primary way that we reach our climate targets. We're still going to have an amount, in the net zero community even sooner, where we have to also remove carbon dioxide. But this is still a very new area, both of research, of commercialization and development. So there needs to be this conversation that involves both, the academic research looking at the risks and trade-off and new potential pathways, and then you have startups that sort of often take these concepts and ideas from the scientific research and get it to this niche level where we're actually seeing these pilots like Project Vesta or like Climeworks for direct air capture to sort of get these proof of concepts. But really, if we want these things to exist on a large scale, it's industry that has that experience on the financing as well as on the construction and has that knowledge to actually make these things on the scale that we're going to need. But at the same time, this isn't just a one-way street. There has to be this back and forth conversation where you are also engaging with the academic and scientific communities to make sure that as we get bigger, we understand what the risks of scaling up are. Because the risk of having a single kelp farm, for example, are not necessarily the same as covering the entire Pacific Oceans in kelp farms. And what does that do to, both carbon storage, but nutrient availability, shipping lanes, things like that. So it's really important that at all stages of scale up, we're going back and checking in with the scientific community and making sure that we always keep the systemic approach. And that's kind of what Bologna focuses on, promoting all sorts of climate solutions, but at the same time making sure that we're honest about the reception, that we're always keeping track of the carbon from its source to the sink, which is of course very challenging in ocean CDR, where you often have very dispersed carbon. So making sure that we're being very honest about what we know and what we don't know, and making sure that there's guardrail regulations so we don't end up doing more damage in the name of negative emissions.
Thank you very much. I think that was actually also excellent, really looking at kind of bringing all the different actors together from the different community, the scientific academia, etc. And I really appreciate the fact that you actually bring in the kind of systemic thinking into this and what is needed. And also the word honesty, which I guess also translated to a lot of transparency that we needed in a kind of just and equitable world would also be something to add there. Thank you for being with us and sharing your expertise and kind of very honest observation and expertise to this conversation. Thank you. Let's see here. I'd like to move on to Professor Dr. Andreas Ochilis, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Also looking at CDR and Ocean Nets for GeoMar Helmut Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany. If you're with us, I'd like you to please go ahead and take the floor. And also maybe if you can shed a bit more light on what you think of the current landscape or seascape, if you like, for accounting on ocean-based CDR. And again, a little bit about this conundrum of the challenges and opportunities that lays before us. Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Minna. Well, and thanks to the audience here and the organizers of this event. Very, very timely and necessary, I think. Well, I'm a scientist and I've been involved in a number of IPCC reports and rounds, and there's some frustration that with the last 30 years, we are really still on the worst track that was set up in 1990 in the first IPCC report, and emission-wise and temperature warming-wise. And as a marine scientist, I'm concerned about oxygen in the ocean. We have a deoxygenation problem, which might be the largest problem of climate change, the longest lasting problem, which has been overlooked for a long time. And I currently run the UN Ocean Decade oxygen program to raise awareness, but also concerns about, well, how severe this can affect the largest ecosystem on the planet, biodiversity crisis, major extinctions. And there we see stopping global warming by reaching net zero emissions can stop ocean deoxygenation, at least in the surface waters, not in the deep ocean. There's not that much hope right now. So we have to reach net zero, and there as a scientific community, we are responsible to line out projections. What can happen under what societal decisions? And we do that using Earth system models. And that's also what we do in Ocean Nets and CDR Mare, run scenarios and see what if. And we see in order to reach net zero, it's, of course, we need emission reduction, but we also see we cannot reduce all emissions to zero in the next few decades. There's a residual emissions of roughly 10%. And to counteract these, to compensate for these, we need CDR, and we don't see that all on land. There are all these side effects as well, ecological, but also humanitarian side effects. So we have to consider the ocean, which we know from science has played a major role in past Earth's historical climate catastrophes to take up all the carbon. So we know it could work. The ocean does work. The question is, does it do it fast enough? And does it do it, or can we manipulate it in a way that is responsible and where we have side effects that can be tolerated given the advantage of reducing CO2? And there, accounting comes into play. It's how do we do that? Right now, we have a Wild West, I would say. We have the voluntary market that has been mentioned already, or the gray market, as you may call it, to offset emissions. And many industry companies use that, societies as well, to, well, maybe greenwash what they do. We know even on land, 85% of these voluntary carbon emissions do oversell largely, may even have the wrong sign in terms of carbon fluxes. In the marine realm, it's likely to be even worse since we understand it less well, and we have an interconnected system with back fluxes if you don't look carefully enough. So we have to do better there. We have a few anchor points, I think, in Europe, and Europe, I think, has the responsibility to lead by example, to set up accounting systems that are transparent, robust, and well, maybe up to change if we have better scientific information, better experience from practical users. But we have to start setting up a transparent and responsible accounting system in Europe, I think. I don't see that anywhere else in the world right now. And we have the CCS directive, Carbon Capture and Storage Directive. That's one anchor point. We have the land use change and forestry regulation. That's on land. That works more or less, I think, pretty well. And we have the upcoming nature restoration law in Europe that is supposed to require that 20% of the EU's land surface, but also the EU's European Sea, undergoes restoration measures. On land, these measures may have the advantage that anybody doing some action there can sell carbon credits and can have a double win by doing that, obeying to the law, but also winning carbon credits. In the ocean, we don't have that right now. So the ocean is disadvantaged. If you want to do regulation, restoration in the ocean, you can't right now get carbon credits for it. And I think there we have to make sure that the ocean is not disadvantaged compared to the land, and Europe has to make propositions, and science can help. Marine spatial planning was mentioned as well, which can help. We have difficulties in the ocean, of course. We have permanence issues. We have different storage media, the sediment, biomass, and the water, which is moving all over the global ocean. And this is really a challenge which we can address and have to address, and science can really help. And science has the responsibility, and I think science funders have to do that in a way that we can do it transparently, and their taxpayers are the best funders, I think, since the scientists then have to report back to the taxpayers what we do with their money. And there again, Europe is in an excellent position to do that very well. We have the tradition of publicly funded research, which is perceived unbiased worldwide. And I think that's a very strong asset we have to use here. So public funding, transparency, and also we have the tradition of keeping biodiversity and environmental issues very high up on our agenda, which I think the environmental movement is strongly supported by science in Europe as well. So this should make us and can make us and has to make us as a leading entity in this global Wild West. And we have the responsibility to organize this, the Wild West of current accounting, to make sure we don't lose time, we don't waste money, and we don't destroy ecosystems, which is currently done by many of these efforts run by startups as well. So a huge responsibility, but also a huge capacity of Europe and a huge recognition worldwide as well, I think, which we have to use now. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Again, very short, concise, and very to the point. Really taking away the need, I mean, both for projection, the different scenarios, but how do we avoid blue washing and where the accounting responsibility comes in. I think that would be a nice segue to our last speaker, last but not least, Professor Laurent Bopp, who's a research director at CNRS. Maybe building on kind of the last point and what we just heard, if you could very briefly describe how you think that models in assessing ocean-based CDR portfolio specifically when it comes to monitoring, reporting, and verification. I'll give you the floor. So thank you very much for adding to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Mina. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you. Yes, I guess as my colleagues, David Keller and Andreas Hochlis, as scientists, we've been working a lot on exploring climate change impacts on the marine ecosystem. And more we're moving towards the solution space. And I guess that's our responsibility too, to contributing by doing more science. I guess it's our responsibility to ensure that some of these options or solutions are properly tested, that the effectiveness is properly evaluated, but also that the potential side effects are properly explored and understood. And that's the responsibility of the scientific community to helping exploring and understanding those issues. As Andreas just said, the ocean is an extremely complex environment. Carbon is stored in many different forms. And as opposed to land carbon in the ocean travels great distances because it's carried by currents. And the carbon in the ocean is continually exchanged between different forms. from dissolved ions to living organisms, but also occasionally with the atmospheric pool. And so now just imagine that we have a way to store more carbon in the ocean by growing macroalgae or adding alkaline substances, and assuming that some of this carbon actually comes from the atmosphere. The challenge of monitoring and verifying the amount of carbon that is taken up by the ocean just from in situ measurements is almost unsurmountable. It's probably much more difficult than what we face with land afforestation, and the difficulties have been mentioned already. You know, natural variability in the ocean is so huge, the forms of carbon are multiple, and all of that obscures the monitoring of this extra carbon. And so my point here is that models are essential tools to help monitor, report, and verify these oceanic CDR techniques. And basically those models, they allow us to create counterfactual worlds in which you can apply or you don't apply any given CDR technology. And this allows you basically to determine the effectiveness of a given method. It also allows you to test any given method in the next decades. And it allows you, in addition to identifying some of the potential side effects. I just give you a very quick example. You know, we've been testing ocean afforestation in EU waters in a model. And what you see is that part of the carbon that is absorbed by the ocean is not absorbed where you cultivate. It's absorbed offshore because this carbon deficit somehow is transported by currents. And that poses lots of issues and challenges for detecting, monitoring, and verifying. And so we need models to do that. So of course, we need models that are developed and designed in addition to in situ and lab experiments. And my last point is that we need more than just one model or one tool for everybody. As it's been done for exploring future climate change and potential impacts, we probably need a variety and diversity of models developed independently by different modeling groups, so that a portfolio of models could be used together to better constrain, monitor, report, and verify all these CDR techniques. Thank you.
Excellent. I'll take that as well with us. We need a whole palette of different kind of models and solutions for this to really to test and also to determine the side effects, and then will then help us to look at the potential trade-off. I think I will give the most difficult task over to MEP Catherine Chabot, who's been waiting patiently online with us here today to really kind of reflect and provide some concluding remarks from this excellent panels and the speakers before. I know that you have to leave shortly, so happy to give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, many thanks, Mina, and very, very happy to see you here. And it was very great to hear your moderation. Many thanks to all the participants, the speakers, and to Maria Carvalho, my dear colleague from our intergroup. I will be very short. As you said, I have to leave, but I was there to listen, because all the topics, this very important topic, is at the heart of all the legislation we are working on in the Parliament. And I would like to highlight several things. Listening to David Keller, I was thinking about the time when we put nuclear waste in the sea with the consequences we know now. And nature-based solutions for me are the main solution. Of course, I'm always a little bit afraid with geoengineering, but those all the solution will be at the heart of the works we will have next month, because we will work on the carbon farming, and the DG Murray representative didn't speak about the carbon farming and restoration law, but we will have to work on those issues. Answering to Professor Alexander Prowers, I would like to highlight that 4 years ago with Françoise Gaille, the oceanographers Françoise Gaille and the Institut Français de la Mer, we launched this appeal for the ocean to be recognized as a global common. That means we are all responsible individually and collectively to protect the ocean. And this global common, we really need to put it at the top of our reflections on those topics. And we launched in Brest 2 calls. A call with on the IPOS, you know, the International Panel for Ocean Sustainability, and I think it should be one of the fora where science could work on this special topic and give probably reports, of course, to the different stakeholders and the politics. We need more science, as Laurent Bob said just a few minutes ago. And we also launched for an Ocean Cup. It's another forum I think we could have to think about the solutions. In the resolution we voted in the Parliament 2 weeks ago, I promote to include the blue carbon in our climate and biodiversity technologies, and I will be part of the delegation of the Parliament in Montreal in December. And I think we will have to push more science, as Laurent Bob said, and to probably, because in this resolution we also highlight and push the Starfish mission and the ocean digital twin. Probably the ocean digital twin should be a solution for better monitoring, the MRV you were speaking about, Laurent. And last point I wanted to highlight is this idea of we have to change of paradigm in our marine activities, and not only to think how to reduce our impact on ocean, but how our activities could have a positive impact. And in this topic of carbon dioxide removal, we really have to think out of the box, I think. And that will be my conclusion. You know that to push all those ocean topics I'm trying to highlight in the Parliament, I've decided to go back at sea, and in 2 weeks I will less than 2 weeks, I will take the departure of the Route du Rhum race, a very famous race in France, a single-ended race between Saint-Malo and Pointe-à-Pitre. So that's why I'm not with you today. And it's my last meeting before. I have a lot of things to prepare before the departure. And for me, it will be my challenge for the ocean. And I really need to have a follow-up with all of you next month, because we will have to work on those topics, as I said, in the restoration law, the carbon farming, etc., etc. And I will give the floor, or you will give the floor, Mina, to Andrew, Barry Andrew, and Barry knows how I'm involved on those topics, even in our development committee, because it's also a question of our development policies in Europe. So many thanks of you, and I have to leave you, but many thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chabot. Thank you very much for your energy, your enlightenment, and really your leadership. And politicians, MEPs, you have a great responsibility, but it is also a shared responsibility for our shared planet. And I wish you all the best at sea. And I think this has been such a timely meeting ahead of COP27, where this is a topic that is going to be placed on the agenda. And for the first time, there will be a physical ocean pavilion just dedicated to the ocean, as well as a virtual pavilion. So we really thank you so much for being with us, and really your Generally really working hard to advance this agenda and come up with creative solutions. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
We always had a little spoiler alert there from the MEP that the next speaker I would like to invite to perhaps provide some further kind of reflections on what on this topic and what we've been discussing today. So MEP, please take the floor and I will mute.
Thank you. Yes, well, we all wish fair sailing to Catherine on her extraordinary expedition. And it's not just a holiday for Catherine. We should all note that she is using the platform she has generated to amplify the messages we've just heard from her. So we really think it is a fantastic endeavor and a very brave endeavor and something I would never do in my wildest dreams. So I want to say how grateful I am to be here. I won't take long. I think Catherine responded very well to the various presentations, and they have been extremely valuable. I happen to be chair of the SDG Alliance here in the European Parliament, so it's an informal group of MEPs. And we try to raise awareness of sustainable development and the goals themselves. And what struck me about the presentations, very briefly, is that there are scientific challenges, there are economic challenges, there are political challenges and legal challenges. And I'm not an expert in this area, but we are still, to a great extent, at proof of concept stage in the scientific challenge phase of this. But it is clearly appropriate and right, and it's great that we are here today, so that we can anticipate the political economy of the challenge that lies ahead. And Professor Proulx outlined the legal and governance challenges that are there, that are not insurmountable, but really, really difficult, given the international nature of our oceans. And one thing that really struck me is to talk about the political economy of this issue is clearly the benefits that will flow from CDR, if successful, will accrue to all of us. And so we therefore have to examine the incentives for investment in this space and the accounting systems that are required in order to incentivize governments and the private sector to invest the trillions of euro that will be required at scale to ensure the outcomes that we're all clearly ambitious about. And the questions that arise are, can you link investments like this to the debate on loss and damage that is going on in the context of COP27 that is coming? Can we use these types of investments in the future, hypothecate them against responsibilities for loss and damage that will arise? Can we avoid displacing investments in green finance? Clearly, this is not a panacea. It's not going to replace the responsibilities for mitigation, but we have to avoid investment in this area, displacing investment in green finance. Can we use it in the effort sharing regulation to some extent? These are questions that I think, jump into my mind, so that while it's excellent that we have the opportunity to discuss these and anticipate where the scientific findings will take us from a political economy point of view, it does raise a huge number of questions. I would also like to react to what Munich Re had to say earlier on. Sorry, to Antonia, no, not to Antonia. Munich Re was Alexa. I beg your pardon, Alexa. And she raised the question, this is around the role of the private sector, if I may. And what we are doing legislatively, and clearly there is a legislative blind spot about this in the European Parliament, and this event and events like it will be very useful in trying to address that. But we are doing certain things that are trying to embed a culture of stakeholder capitalism in our private sector. For example, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive that I'm working on as rapporteur for the Intercommittee. So these initiatives are trying to embed this culture of stakeholder capitalism, looking at longer-term strategies and away from mere shareholder value. And the reason I bring this up in the context of what Alexa had to say about from Munich Re is that she made reference to the fact that the insurance industry has an inherent interest in ensuring that there is success in this area. Because clearly, on the one side, there is the social value of reducing emissions, but there's also the economic value of reducing claims on the insurance industry. And this idea of shared value or triple bottom line is part of the conversation that we need to have around how we make sure that we approach this in the correct way, having regard to the political economy issues. May I just finally mention an issue to do with the SDGs, given that I am the chair of the SDG Alliance. We're not an intergroup like this group, we're an informal group, but we work very hard. And that is that the SDGs are an excellent way to examine the question of whether side effects might exist and whether there may be the trade-offs that were referred to earlier on to avoid, to a certain extent, regime collisions, I think was the phrase that was used. And there's already work going on. A researcher in Utrecht called Matthias Honiger has started to develop a matrix that identifies where there are research gaps, interactions and risks between different methods of CDR and each SDG. And for example, there are potential negative impacts on food chain interactions that were already referred to by Professor Keller, I think, and the potential for affecting food prices and access to food, which is SDG 2. And obviously there are impacts on displacing green finance for SDG 13. So I think expanding the matrix that is currently being developed and deepening its future impact could be extremely useful. So with that, Elias, thank you very much. It's been a huge education for me, and I think the last couple of hours has underlined the need for much greater awareness in the political space for this activity. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Thank you very much for that kind of concluding remark, bringing this together. And I think your last point really is key and really demonstrate the importance of this kind of meetings, is to really build the awareness because it's so broad and so many different actors. I mean, you pointed to it very directly in terms of, yes, if you look at the political economy of the ocean, but there are, legal blind spots. At the same time, we really want to actually create incentives for investments. And I think, moving forward with caution, of course, but we're all dedicated and determined to, tackle the climate crisis as such. So I'm also taking away a lot from all these experts, and I hope this is just a beginning of this conversation. And I think also in a final point to bring into the kind of the whole space of multilateral environmental agreements. I heard mentioned the CBD. We had a legal expert, Professor Puls, also talking about mentioning UNCLOS. There is also the internationally legally binding treaty being negotiated for the High Seas Treaty, so biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction for conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So I think it's lots of different kind of play, many different actors. So once again, I would just like to take stock here because we were running short of time, and I thank everybody for really making a concerted joint effort to stick to that. And I understand there's a few more minutes before the room will be vacated. I would like to Bailey check that there's no questions online. Are there any questions? We might have time for one or two, if fairly short questions, because we have to, and before we give the floor back to Professor Keller to kind of to close the meeting. Ilias, are there any questions that you can see are raised hands in the room?
Thank you very much, Mina, and allow me to also say once again, thank you very much and congratulations for such excellent work in navigating us in such a lively and interactive manner through the discussion today. Looking into participants in the room, there might be perhaps one burning question before we wrap up and provide the floor to Dr. Keller. So please, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Eli Mitchell-Larsen from Carbon Gap. We're a new NGO focused on all carbon removal methods, including ocean nets, and making sure they're deployed safely and effectively. So a theme we kept hearing was these side effects and these dangers that we're concerned about. And we also share those concerns. On the other hand, we heard this idea of urgency around ocean suffocation or deoxygenation and just the urgency of climate change itself. So it strikes me that the timeline to answering these questions so that we can make go, no-go decisions about specific ocean CDR methods and whether we actually scale them up is so short. So my question for the incredible research panel that's assembled online and in person is, what can we do as members of civil society and NGOs to break down barriers that would let research go faster? It might be easy to say more money, and that may be the case, but what would be some of the other elements, whether it's human capital or other barriers that are slowing down sort of practical, actionable research that can get us to definitive, never definitive, but answers where we can make those go, no-go decisions and let these methods actually put a dent on climate?
Thank you very much. We did very instantly, shortly lose a bit of audio there, but also very much thank to you, for civil society to be there and for your interest to engage and accelerate. So thank you for being there as well. Was there anyone of the panelists online or in the room that would like to address this question?
Yes, Andreas Oschlies, I would like to briefly suggest, I think what is needed most is full transparency of all efforts. There are many startups, many NGOs looking at things, measuring, observing, manipulating, and we have to know what is going on, and we have to report what is the result. All findings have to be reported. Success, failures. So many failures, many things will not work, but we have to know about this. We cannot waste time by not telling and letting the next company, startup trying the same thing again and again, destroying parts of the ocean. I think this is a code of conduct or some, we have to agree on some responsible research, of ocean management system. We try to do that for ocean alkalinity enhancement right now, a best practices guide that's under development. There's many other efforts, responsible research initiatives. I think there's the most urgent need to allow full transparency and speed up knowledge exchange of not only of successes, of failures. I think that's what we learn most from, usually. Thanks.
Thank you. So this is words I kept hearing echoing throughout though, is transparency and responsibility. So in terms of for the civil society, what their role could potentially play, listening to you, would be also to kind of communicate and help raise awareness to the general public of this potential risk and as well to watch this space. So without further ado, please, I'd like to welcome back Professor Keller. We'll like to take the floor once again to kind of conclude or close this meeting rather. So looking forward to your excellent forthcoming remarks. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for their excellent presentations, discussions, and interventions. I think we've heard a lot of material here today, and what really struck out to me was the many issues and the multiple dimensions that are involved in this problem. This is not an academic thing. This is not just a business thing, not just a policy issue. There's many dimensions, and there has to be a lot of work done together. Academics need to work with policymakers. We need to help develop new regulations. We have to have input from NGOs and various stakeholders, and we need a lot of communication, and a lot of this involves transparency and other things. So I think that's one of the things that really sticks out to me, is that it's a very, very complex issue. Climate change is, of course, a complex issue. This becomes even a bit more complex here, and there needs to be a lot of work done together. So I think I will conclude it there, since I know we're out of here soon and there's sandwiches. I think on the screen there is just, if you want to read it, I won't go through it. This is some things that Andreas, Alexander, and I came up with questions for policy challenges, if you want to know our final thoughts before we conclude here. But these are some of the questions that we're thinking about, at least in terms of what's relevant for some of the policy challenges. And I'd just like to thank everybody.
Mina, I think you are muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering why nobody was clapping. Apologies. No, I just wanted to kind of realizing that we need to close this meeting. And once again, thank you all. And I hope that this could also be made available so it can be shared and for others who could not be with us online or in person. I wish you all the best and thank you very much, everyone. I'll be back to you, Elias. And,
Thank you very much, Mina. And indeed, the presentations and recording of the event will be made available as of tomorrow at the website of the European Parliament Intergroup at ebcd.org. Once again, thanks to MPs in the room, Mina, for great work in moderating today's discussion. And of course, a warm thanks goes out to all speakers and attendees for their active engagement with regards to today's event. So on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, I'm very much looking forward to continuing the discussions in the near future. And until then, well, all the best. Thank you very much.